Hello, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm the lead instructional designer here at Candid, and I'm here to welcome you to our webinar today, all about how you can leverage your role as a funder to advance transparency and equity with Candid profiles. I'm so glad you're here with us. With that, you can see our speakers here on screen now, Eva, Davis, and Neal. I'm going to let Eva take the reins and share her slides. So as she does so, I'll just briefly introduce Eva. She's the Senior Director of Profile Management here at Candid, and she leads the vision, goal setting, strategy, and execution of the Profile Updater program. And so doing so, she's been an advocate for greater nonprofit transparency for data-driven practices to drive impact. And a fun fact about Eva that I learned today, she's actually a Rhodes Scholar with a PhD in physics from Oxford. So with that, Eva, I'll turn it over to you and we can see your slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the fun introduction. Welcome, everyone. I am very excited to share with you some of the work that we as Candid have been doing to really make sure that nonprofits and foundations connect around information and connect in a way that is equitable, that is accessible for organizations of all sizes, but particularly the small, rural, BIPOC-led organizations that need to navigate this space. So let me share with you a little bit of what we'll be doing today. So we are going to talk about how you can take very concrete action to demonstrate your transparency as a funder and what kinds of information are really helpful for those smaller organizations. We're also going to talk a bit about how to act on the information that you see in the profiles and how to encourage some of your grantees to share that information, because it's a two-way exchange between a potential grant maker and a potential grant seeker. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the specifics of encouraging your grantees. And I'm very excited to have Neal and Davis. They're going to take us through a little mini interview of how it is that the Mott Foundation went about this. So let's talk a little bit about transparency. Building transparency, why is that important, and why is it important to do it through Candid? We are the place where many organizations come to ask questions about what's happening in the sector, what kind of funding is flowing to what causes, who's getting grants and who is not. Millions of nonprofits are spending money around the world in order to have social impact, and we try to really find out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters, what difference it's making. So it's all about questions. Ultimately, the information that you can find via Candid is really meant to address questions that you have in doing your work. So from a grant maker's perspective, who leads and works at nonprofits, which organizations are supported and which are not, but could be, who's being served by nonprofits, what populations are being served and in what community, and then how are grants focused or targeted or not if you have a portfolio of grants, and many more questions besides. But these are particularly important ones when we're talking about transparency and equity. And then, of course, nonprofits have questions as well. The first one here is probably the primary one, which is, I'm trying to do good work in my community. Where can I find funding? Who should I approach? How can I be more visible? How do I know that there's a fit, that there's a relationship that could happen between a grant maker and a grant seeker? And then there could be lots of other questions. Who else is doing good work in my community? Who could I partner with? Perhaps who could I learn from? And many more questions besides. So we at Candid, have come together. Guidestar used to be a resource principally for nonprofits. Foundation Center was really an information source about foundations. The two are now together within Candid in order to precisely enable this dynamic of being able to ask each other questions and answer them and facilitate that exchange of information. Where does that information come from? Well, certainly it comes from you all. I mean, it comes from you all in a couple of ways, through the forms that you file with the IRS, which is official reporting that's required of many funders and nonprofits, but it also comes from you organizations directly, because the IRS is an important resource, but it is one that really paints a picture of the past, right? So the IRS reporting happens, and there's usually 18 to 24 or plus months of lag between the information that you submit and what a potential grantee or a grant seeker is able to access. That's too long. I don't know who you were 2 years ago, but I'm no longer that same person that was there 2 years ago. So we are really trying to actively connect with nonprofits and foundations directly to make sure that the information that's being shared is current and really reflects the work that you're doing today. So why? Because people are looking for this information, certainly in times of crisis around COVID, certainly in times of crisis around the racial reckoning that we've been experiencing, and people need real-time information in order to make real-time decisions. So we're working on different aspects of this, how to get better quality data that's responsive, that reduces the burden on organizations having to share it, and that uses a common standard so it's more useful for everyone. I will be very honest here. Here's a moment of truth. We can't do it alone, but foundations don't always make this easy. From past research, we know that many foundations don't even have a website, that they may not be sharing some of the information that they've learned as a result of grant making, that they don't share their grant history in particular, which is something that's really helpful for nonprofits to know, and that many of them don't accept unsolicited applications. So we're trying to work on this, and we encourage you to work with us on this, because equity can't happen if you can't be found and aren't accessible. So how do we tackle this? A couple of simple things. Number one, use your Candid profile. Some of you may be wondering, what is that, and do I even have one? Both nonprofits and foundations have Candid profiles. The backbone of information from the IRS serves as the foundation for the profile, but it goes way beyond that, and the information that you contribute really makes the profile tell your story. So let's talk about this. So the first step in actually sharing your information via Candid is to claim your organization's profile. I'm not going to go through all the steps, but there's a very helpful 2-minute video that you'll have access to as a result of this webinar that just tells you what this process is. But essentially, we need to make sure that the right person or a person representing the organization, one that contributes information and can modify a profile. And it doesn't have to be some special role. Typically, it's someone who might be managing the visibility or marketing for the organization or the fundraising for the organization. Sometimes it's the executive director if it's a very small organization that does this. Sometimes it's a board member. But essentially someone that we verify, yes, they represent the organization that they say they represent, so that it's good quality information. And then the next step after claiming is to actually think about earning your seal of transparency. And the seals are a guide to the type of information that's being sought. And we this year have moved from calling them Guidestar seals to them fully becoming Candid seals, because Candid is fully committed to continuing this work over the next years. And so we want to show that we're standing behind it. And then in terms of the seals themselves, when I say they're a guide, bronze is very basic info. Silver is program and some information about your brand. Gold is where the rubber hits the road, asking about financials and also some information about people who work at the organization, including demographic information for leader. And then platinum starts to get at results and the way that you think about your success and sharing that. And then beyond that, there are other sections that really flesh out this story. the seals are a basic kind of foundation. And then for grant makers, I want to highlight that we've introduced a new set of questions that are really about how to approach your organization and how to learn about the kind of work that you do. And this is what's particularly important for those who are seeking grants. So I'll actually highlight those more specifically as we go through it. And then I also want to call out that beyond the leader demographics, we do ask about other demographics of who works and leads of the organization: board members, senior staff. There's also a list of equity strategies, actions that organizations can take to be more equitable. And so those are optional sections that we encourage folks to complete. So going through these fairly quickly, but just really highlighting what's important within the bronze seal, it's basic info. You see that. And one of the new questions that we've added is, does your organization make grants or donations to other nonprofits? So that's a basic question. If you're a funder, you should say yes. That's the end of that story. But that's what triggers the additional questions about how and what kind of grant making that you do. So the other thing that it triggers is a little bit more information about who you are as a grant maker. And this is in the form of asking you some basic questions using the philanthropy classification system, which was based on the NTEE taxonomy. But essentially it's asking, what type of funder are you? Are you a community foundation, a private foundation? What types of organizations do you fund? And you can just enter text and sort of the menu should be responsive, or you can look through the full menu of types of organizations. But are they typically 501c nonprofits? Are they only 501c nonprofits? Are there religious organizations that you fund? You can express that. What kind of support strategies? So what type of support do you provide? Is it grants? Is it loans? Is it other types of support? And then transaction types. So what form does it take? And these are, again, kind of responsive menus. I encourage you to type the terminology that you know, and then hopefully you'll see some responses that match it. And then within Silver, we start to talk about the work that you do. Where does it happen? You know, what are the programs? What's a short description? What is the budget for each program? You can also communicate some of the photos and videos that may be going along with that. So as an organization, you also might want to share your logo and tagline. Again, that's telling your story, kind of being clear about who you are. And then this is where we get to important information from an equity perspective, right? In order to be found, in order to be accessible, people need to know where to apply and how to apply for potential funding, and what some of your guidelines and restrictions are so that they're clear when they're applying. So this is a new set of questions that we've introduced as optional questions, but they kind of belong in the Silver section, really about those specifics. So you can express in your own words and also in the form of dates, kind of what some of that process looks like. And then moving on to Gold, you know, this is again where you can share financial information that helps people have a clearer sense of the capacity for funding that your organization has and how that capacity is deployed. So here you can upload a financial statement if you have one, or type in information if you don't have a completed audited statement. And then you can also start to share more about the leader demographics of who leads your organization. And then there are 4 specific demographic sections that you will be asked, not all of which you'll need to complete. And we want to do this really respectfully. So your leader should be aware that you're sharing this information on the profile, and there's always the option to decline to state if they're not comfortable sharing certain info. So we are aware that particularly with demographic data, for some of you, it may be a new thing to ask yourselves, your own staff, and it may be new to ask your grantees for this information. And so we provide a guide that talks about some of the best practices and also shares the specific questions that will be part of the profile. So one of the things I'll highlight here again is asking, not guessing, and being clear that it is going to be on the public profile. So in order to then get beyond the how to apply and kind of who leads our organization, we also encourage you at the gold level to share with us your specific grant information. Probably your grant history and your recent history is one of the most important pieces of information for potential applicants. Like, what kind of organizations do you fund? How do you fund them? This is essentially what potential applicants need to know. In this case, we're asking you to email us essentially a file with your grants, and there's some best practices for how to share information about your grants, because oftentimes, some grant descriptions are frankly not very telling. So we do provide some guidelines on, what kind of information is helpful for people to see in order to understand the way that your organization funds and works. So there are links to those resources, and that's probably a subject of another webinar, exactly those grant making best practices. And then finally, I'll just say briefly about Platinum. This is a section that both for nonprofits and for funders can cause some anxiety. But what I want to tell you is we're not asking you to invent something new here. We're simply asking you, how do you measure your results and your success today, essentially? How do you talk about it with your board? What kind of metrics are you tracking? And how do you think about your goals? So here, we're going to ask you essentially 2 text questions that say, what's your organization aiming to accomplish and what are your strategies for making it happen? And then you write a response. Again, you can leverage existing strategic plans, existing documents for the board. This is not something new that you need to invent for the profile. And then finally, sharing a few metrics. The top 3 to 5 could be more. We, I think, accept up to 20. And to share a little bit of that metric history if it's something that you've been tracking for a while. So because that provides richer context for the scale of the work that you do and the depth of the work that you do. You can also include context as a note with each metric if you need to comment on it. We provide certain kinds of tagging to help people understand what this metric is. So, for example, what target population you serve, and if it's connected to a particular program or not. We also talk about, type of metric, is it an output or an outcome with a basic definition, and the direction of success. So that's a bit about Platinum. The one final thing I want to point out to you is that once you contribute information, you do need to publish it. And this is a step that may not seem entirely intuitive. It should be in the experience once you claim your profile. But I just want to note for you that sometimes folks want to take their time to edit. Sometimes they want to invite other colleagues in the organization to become a manager. And if you've been approved to be a manager, you can easily invite others. You just click an add a manager button and provide an email. And so if you're taking your time to contribute the information, then you can hold off before publishing. Once you're ready, you should publish, right? That's the step that makes the draft official, and that's the step that then populates your profile both on Guidestar, sends your information through to Candid, which then goes lots of places. It doesn't just go on your Guidestar profile. It goes into Foundation directory. It goes into those COVID-19 pages, any special issue pages that we have. It goes lots of places. So publish when you're ready. And even if you make a mistake and you publish again. Like, nothing bad happens just because you published. If you looked at your profile and you think, gosh, that's not quite what I meant, publish again, and the information becomes updated. So that's a little bit about the logistics, right, of how to participate, how to contribute information. But I want to talk a little bit about, beyond kind of taking this critical step of actually doing this, you can also celebrate it. right? So in benefits, you'll have access to the seal, and you can show that you are committed to this and that you're being transparent. You can share on social media and more. And we provide some toolkits for you to do that easily. And then obviously there are some additional resources we're highlighting if you need more help. So you can reach out to us at help.guidestar.org, and we have real people answering real questions. There is also additional, help center articles and guides if you have specific questions. So those are the nuts and bolts of the profile, but I'm very excited to talk a little bit about how this gets applied in a real situation as a two-way exchange between a foundation and grantees and potential grantees. And so I invite my colleagues Davis and Neal to come on video, and I'll just start us off and say, in 2021, the Mott Foundation, went a step beyond and said, look, we're going to actually contribute information about ourselves, which maybe we hadn't done in the past through Candid, and we're going to ask our grantees to participate and specifically to share demographic info. And I'll hand it over to Davis and Neal to tell us a little bit more about what happened next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eva, and thank you so much for joining us, Neal. This is just an exciting opportunity for us to be able to share with our colleagues some of the great work that the Mott Foundation has been doing. Somewhat cutting edge, joined by just only a few foundations in this space. And so just before I hand it over to you, Neal, I just want to give a brief introduction to folks because we know you well as Neal Hegarty, but others might not quite know you in the room. So Neal is currently the Vice President of Programs at the Mott Foundation. He works and oversees the grant making in the Foundation's 4 program areas. And works closely with both the senior management and the staff in designing and implementing the Foundation's grant-making strategies. So he's in a really interesting place at the nexus of strategy and implementation. And we invited him here because the Mott Foundation agreed to use and leverage the Candid profiles for the grantees in their US portfolio and incorporate the Candid profile data into their systems in lieu of asking for that information again in an application, which we know, those of us who create applications and those of us who fill them out know that a lot of times there's duplicative questions and redundancies in how we ask for information. And so Mott really wanted to take a stance on kind of reducing the burden on nonprofits and decided to leverage the data that the Candid profiles has. And so Neal, do you want to just start off and sort of explain like the road that got you there in terms of how you started advocating for that and a little bit about kind of how that fits into your commitment to equity, and just start us off with that. Thanks.
Yeah, happy to, and thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here and talking about this. I'm a huge fan of all things Candid, back to the Guidestar and Foundation Center days. I think I have engaged or worked or used tools from the organization since I was in graduate school and when I was working in nonprofits, fundraising, and now at the foundation, incorporating tools into the work that we do as grant makers. So, and I've had the pleasure of being on the board of trustees for a number of years, so happy to be involved. But I'm also really keen on talking about what we've done recently to incorporate the Candid profiles from Guidestar. So the mission of our foundation is to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society. And so we always have to ask ourselves how we're doing on these dimensions, and we do. But after the murder of George Floyd a couple of years ago and the general sense of direction of where we were as a society and what was happening, we wanted to dig deeper and really question ourselves more about our commitment and our work on equity. And at the same time, as we were doing all of that, I was reading interesting reports from various parts of the field and research groups talking about specific data and information about who is and who isn't, more importantly, who isn't getting funding from foundations, and some of the analysis of discrepancies in pay and levels of support for organizations that are Black-led or led by other BIPOC groups or people of color or women. And so we really wanted to look at what we're doing because I couldn't answer those questions for our own foundation with the information we had on hand of how well we were doing with supporting Black-led organizations, how well we were supporting women-led organizations, et cetera. So we wanted to figure that out and incorporate something as part of our normal due diligence. So similar to a lot of the conversation you've already had today, we didn't want to layer another burden on our grantees and on the nonprofits who apply to us. We didn't want to be another funder who has a mandatory set of custom forms that folks have to fill out that is only used by us one time and not anybody else. So naturally, to me, Guidestar seemed like a solution that adhered to a data 1x type principle where nonprofits can enter the data once and it can be used by us, and we can incorporate that into our systems, but it can be used by any other funder, any other researcher, evaluator, or just donors in general public to see about the organization. So we started to think about that both as increasing our look at equity, reducing the burden for nonprofits, and hopefully helping to contribute to expanding the usefulness of data beyond an individual grantor or funder. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think the key piece here is also standardizing a little bit of this information, because one of the things that we have noticed is that a lot of other foundations are having these questions, and what ends up happening is they're sort of designing taxonomies to meet their immediate needs, but then you wind up with the same thing that we have in all other spaces, which is siloed information that's not comparable because you're not using a common standard. So the idea of being able to use the demographic survey questions as a common standard really does kind of allow our field to be able to compare apples to apples and look at things at a much broader level as well. So thank you for doing that. Tell us a little bit about how you went about it, because I think this is one of those areas where we're sort of talking part strategy and then part technical implementation, and there's process and technical implementation. Do you want to share a little bit about the ins and outs of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things at the front end of wanting to get better data about who exactly make up the organizations we fund. Seems simple, but it's actually pretty hard. And so there was a lot of discussions both about what we wanted to do and then importantly how we went about it. And so I do want to say though that capturing the demographics and capturing the understanding who works at the organizations that applies for us and who leads the organizations that apply to us and that we fund is just one step in a broader equity journey. So it's not just about counting heads and looking at the data in and of itself, but incorporating it into all of our tools. And so the first thing we did was spend a lot of time talking about that and thinking about that. One of the limitations that's sort of inherent in the system right now, and for us as a global funder, is we really only are able to engage with Guidestar and Candid seals around US-based 501c3s. Not a lot in the database that are government entities or global organizations. So we segmented our data set within our grants management. We use Flux to figure out our US-based 501c3s. We worked with you guys on the APIs, so somebody else can explain the technical aspects behind an API, but using an API to bring the data into our system. We sent a request to all of our grantees to voluntarily add their demographic information to their profiles, to claim their profile and add that information. We did not make it a grant requirement. We felt we want to make it a voluntary thing and try to get as much cooperation as we could from our grantee community. And then we worked with our IT department to create integration tools through those APIs to bring that information from Guidestar directly into the grants management system that our program officers look at every day. And let me just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. This is just a quick little screenshot from a Flux card for one of our grantees, Council of Michigan Foundations, and they know I was going to use them as an example, so they don't mind me sharing this data. But when our program officers go in and look at the organizational record or work in a grant for Council of Michigan Foundations, and this is true for any of our US-based 501c3s, we built a section in there that shows that they do have a Guidestar profile, and it says whether it is answers yes or no, whether they have added their race and ethnicity reporting and added their gender reporting, and it says what level of seal they have claimed. So on this, I can see that CMF has claimed a silver profile, and they have added their race and ethnicity reporting. And then the next slide, we can show that if I click through where it says see the organizational reporting, we built using Power BI a set of reporting so we can see in real time, and that changes as they update and they manage it. It's their information, their self-identified reporting of who their organization demographics are: senior staff, board, by gender and by race. If we wanted to, we could expand this and also have bisexual orientation, disability, and other demographic information that is capturable in Guidestar. And then the final thing is taking that information then, that was just CMF, that can roll up to all of our current grantees. And so then I have a dashboard that any of our program staff and any of our management can see that says collectively how we're doing as an organization, how many of what proportion of the board members of all of our grantees in the US or leaders are in certain demographic groups around race and gender. So that's just a quick look at that. Those are tools that are buildable by others. The APIs are something anybody can buy from Guidestar and incorporate, and we have a great IT team here that built this, and they're happy to share with others on how this can be integrated into folks' grants management platform.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neal. Just really quickly before we segue, because Mott Foundation is one of many foundations, and I would say actually one of many regions as well as philanthropy serving organizations that are sort of engaging with Candid in this way. So, we talked to you about completing your own profile, and then simultaneously are also talking to you about how you might leverage the profiles of your grantees and incorporate that information to build more efficiency, standardize the information for the field, and kind of move information more effectively around the field. Tell us a little bit about how your grantees have reacted to this. I mean, you're one of many now, so they're starting to get these calls. In fact, funny enough, last year when you started doing this, Packard was doing the same, and I did a presentation with Environmental Grantmakers Association, and they were saying, wow, it's interesting. We got 3 emails from Kaufman, Mott, and Packard all saying, hey, guess what? Go fill out your profile. We're just going to use that information. So they were like, well, it seemed overwhelming at first, but then they realized that the ask was the same thing. So tell us a little bit about how your grantees have reacted.
So yeah, so the grantee reaction has been positive. I think by and large, the feedback I got from grantees was appreciative that we care and that we want to know and that we're asking. We're appreciative that we are using a public data set and not something that's custom for us. So we got a lot of feedback on that. We did get some concern and some questions asking about what are we going to do with the data, how are we going to use it, how is it going to impact our decision making, and people wanted more transparency and more on that. So trying to make sure we're clear as to why we want data from people, which I think is true for all of us. When people ask us for data, we want to know how it's going to be used. And then this year, one of our focuses is going to be to try to figure out how to get more uptake. So for those that have not provided that information in Guidestar, we're going to double down with our program staff to figure out from those grantees if it's a technical barrier, if it's a philosophical barrier, if it's just a logistics and time barrier, and understand why they're not for those that have not chosen to participate. I suspect it's a little of all 3 of those.
Yeah, I think figuring out what those barriers are is so important. And so much of this, I mean, it's really important that we remember, so much of this is about centering the nonprofit experience so that we can satisfy our information needs without adding undue burden on the nonprofits. So, I would say, that's got to be sort of a central piece of this, if what's really falling under the equity conversation that we're trying to have in the field and to improve practices to support a stronger equity position. Well, thank you so much. And I guess I'll just sort of tie us in a little bit here, which is to say that Candid is making big moves right now to extend this kind of a partnership across the field. And if this is something that appeals to you, just know that, the demographic data we are making that a commitment to share that with the field in multiple formats. And so we're inviting other foundations to join us in building these kinds of efficiencies by leveraging the Candid profile so that we can all go out saying, hey, complete the profile and imagine if, how much of that profile could answer most of the questions on your grant application, or even the kind of organizational information you might ask of a nonprofit. But in addition to that, specifically, I think the demographic data is super important. So, take a minute, look at your own profile and actually compare it to your grant application and the types of information. If there's a lot of overlap, I mean, imagine the time you could save a nonprofit in, filling out your application if there is a lot of overlap. And then I'll just say, in the context of how we will work with a foundation for doing this kind of exchange, where we will happily give you that data, but we want to make sure that you're also able to ask for it in a way that it reduces that burden on nonprofits. We will provide you with toolkits and talking points and whatever you might need to support your nonprofit's journeys around that. And so, just know that this is intended to be an exchange. This is intended to support kind of that broader information infrastructure, the centralizing of data, the comparability of data. And we really want to facilitate your journey in asking for it. So, at the end of this, if you're interested at all, you can just write to partnerships@candid.org, and one of us will follow up with you and be happy to, engage with you in understanding kind of what your specific needs are and what type of solutions you would benefit from, whether it's like using an API. Maybe you already have an API and it's bringing in the demographic data, right? Maybe you just want a flat file with the demographics of the organizations that are part of your portfolio, or maybe you want to do some visualization. I will tell you, just since I've got 1 minute left here, I will tell you that we are working right now on a very cool tool called with Tableau Foundation to help visualize the demographic data so that you could even kind of create your own report based on the EINs of the organizations that are in your sphere. This isn't the final view, but just consider this like a quick snapshot, and it would follow the same categories as the demographic survey on the profile. And it basically, you'd put in your EINs, it'll tell you how many of those organizations have claimed their profiles, how many have seals, at what level, and how many have shared demographic data. And then it will give you an analysis along race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability status of those organizations at the different levels of, board, senior staff, leader. And so you can sort of see the breakdowns, and you'll be able to publish, like, pull down PDF reports. We're hoping that will be, prime time ready this summer. And I think that will be a really useful way, even for some of our partners, for instance. They don't even want to bring the demographic data into their grants management system. They just want to be able to track their progress. And so this is a way off their system or off grid for them to kind of keep track of that while using common standards. So with that, I will turn it back over to Chris to take us home here.
So we have a few questions already. First one to start for you, Eva, is, does it cost anything to claim a profile?
So I can say no. Claiming a profile and updating it and publishing it as many times as you need to is free. So it's free for any nonprofit that participates. It's free for foundations that participate. We know that you're taking your time and you're sharing your data, right? So that we know that you're already contributing in that way, and so otherwise there's no price barrier. And also what Davis mentioned is, we are working on lots of ways to make sure that this information, especially the demographic information, is accessible to you and lots of others. And so if you partner with us, we provide the information for free in the form of a data file. If it's a deeper integration, we are talking about APIs, and there is a price for those, but we're talking about like how to make that accessible for lots of different types of organizations. The Tableau dashboard, like, we're working on lots of ways with a commitment to really making this information flow.
Great. And another question that I think, Davis, you may be well positioned to answer. Can you tell me a little bit more? So if I'm a foundation and I want to access demographic information related to my foundation's grantees, how can I access that? How can I use it?
Yeah, thanks so much. Well, Eva just touched on that a little bit, which I think is really important to kind of drive home. I mean, the utility of this data is kind of at the core of things. We're not just collecting data for data's sake. So we want to make sure that that we are making it accessible in a way that is meaningful to all of our partners. And so at the basic level, I mean, you can, if you partner with us, you can have access to all the demographic data in basically a flat file that we will update monthly. That gives you a lot of flexibility. I mean, you can play with all the data and compare things. Especially if you're tech savvy, you can move that data around and make some really interesting visualizations. currently the Premier API is what integrates basically all of the Candid profile fields, and that includes the demographic data. And there are some very cool iterations of those integrations. Now, that because it is literally pulling all of the fields of the Candid profile and you're mapping them into your grants management system so that they call and update that information. There is a fee associated with that, and that does require a bit of technical lift to kind of bring those fields in. But once it's built, then you're running on an interesting cadence where you can just update information as nonprofits. We have great examples of foundations like the Heron Foundation, for instance, that doesn't even really have an application anymore. They literally just have as part of their grant agreement that organizations maintain a gold level seal, and they watch to see when it was last updated, and that's part of what they use for their application essentially. And so they're sort of like, you know, right at the sort of the pinnacle of what we would really like to encourage folks would be how much information do you really need to know? How much more information besides what's on the profile do you really need to know to make a decision? And how can you leverage that as much as possible so that, you know, you're reducing the burden on the nonprofits as much as possible. And then I would say, you know, where we understand folks to be is like making meaning out of this data, and that's where the Tableau dashboard really comes into play. I think that will help all of us to take things off spreadsheets and just start to be able to compare over time, or programs like, you know, the Tableau dashboard. I love the idea that, for instance, you as foundation officers in different capacities could literally, you know, check yourself, for instance, and look at the pool of applicants that you have, and look at the pool of grantees that you have, and compare the two to see if there aren't some implicit biases in your decision making that are revealed through this automatic report generation. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to leverage this data and kind of move the field forward in terms of how we make decisions, who benefits from those decisions. And ultimately, when you think about it, what Eva was talking about was e-reporting at the end, and that's where, like, Candid being Candid is the coolest thing, because it's from that continuum of the organization to all the way to that funding decision and who benefits from those grants, that we're starting to be able to trace that whole continuum of the experience and how organizations are coming together in funding relationships. That I think is going to be kind of some next level conversations that we'll be able to have as a field in moving the equity conversation forward.